We need houses.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. If I could just call the meeting to order. We've had apologies from Councillor Tanner, so the first item of business will be to appoint a chair for tonight's meeting. So if I could ask for nominations, please. Nominations for chair for this meeting.
Nominate Councillor Haynes.
Councillor Haynes.
You're seconding.
Yes.
Are there any other nominations? No? In which case I declare Councillor Haynes duly appointed to chair the next meeting of the Audit Standards Committee.
I welcome first of all the Grant Patterson, but we haven't got Scarlett.
No, I'm afraid she sent her apologies tonight, so...
I don't blame her.
Ciao.
The first item on the agenda is the evacuation procedure. I think everybody here knows the procedure, but I'm duty bound to point out that should the alarm go off, it will be for real, it won't be a practice. Just follow me now. That's the best and quickest way. Thank you. Apologies.
Councillor Tromans, Mrs Nelson and Councillor Tandy are the ones I received.
Chair Councillor Neil Phillips, please.
Yeah. The minutes of the previous meeting. You want this on?
Yeah. As soon as somebody says true and accurate record of the previous
Of
procedure.
course. Yeah. Can I sign them as a true and correct record of the previous meeting?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Declarations of interest. No?
Just me, I think. And newly appointed to the art team within the housing sector.
I think she's made a note of that, yeah. Public consultation.
Yes, Chair, we've got speakers for items 6, 8, 10 and 11. Councillor Dark wishes to speak on items 6, 8, 10 and 11.
Item 6.
That's
That's
to kick off, Chair, and then
Then,
the speaker will speak.
yeah,
Okay, thank you, Chair. Evening, everybody. In front of you today, you've got one report for us entitled Informing the Audit Risk Assessment for the Council. And this is part of our under auditing standards. We have to have a two-way communication, or to look to help a two-way communication between ourselves as auditors and you as the Audit Committee and those charged with governance. Basically, what the paper does is outline a set of questions that we have actually raised with management in the first place, and we have management's responses to that, and we've recorded that within this document. And it covers the areas of, and I suppose picking up on the areas that you've reported, audit plan to the previous audit committee, looking for what governance and arrangements you have in place around to prevent fraud, how you understand how you demonstrate your compliance with laws and regulations. There's a specific issue around, as auditors, we have to be satisfied about the going concern of the council. Now, under the, I'm sure Craig could take allude to this a bit more. Under the Code of Accounting Practice, local government accounts are prepared on a going concern basis, because there's always the assumption that if anything did go catastrophically wrong with a council, that the service would be transferred to another public body. So you would always prepare your accounts on a going concern basis. We also have to look about whether there might be any material uncertainties, and that's if there's anything out there that might impact on your financial position or going concern basis. And part of this is communicating, are you satisfied, and part of that is reflected in our audit plan around value for money. But that's probably one area to look at. And then what your arrangements are for identifying related parties, and then making sure that they are properly accounted for in the accounts. And then the last section is around accounting estimates, and in our audit plan we put in things around material balances. And this is really what we've tried to highlight here, the key accounting estimates, or the large accounting estimates within your financial statements. Because if you're happy with the content of this, then that gives me assurance around certain assertions when you sign off the accounts. So I wasn't going to go through this page by page in that sense. We're, as your auditors, we've gone through it with your management, we're happy with the responses. I can give you my view that we are happy that the responses given by management are consistent with our knowledge and understanding of the council. What we're asking you as part of the work here is, having read the report, is are you satisfied that these are also consistent with your understanding, and actually an opportunity for you to say if there are any specific comments you want to give back to us as auditors that we might take into account as part of our planning. From our perspective, having reviewed the responses, it hasn't altered the way that the risks that we've already communicated with you, but clearly we do keep a watching brief on that as the audit progresses. So I wasn't going to go any more than that, but I'm happy to take specific questions, whether that be directly from the committee or in terms of the speech.
Keith, you wanted to speak on this one?
Yeah, they have put my chair out, so I'll use this one along. Yeah, audit is really, really important, and there's a whole load of things that are also very important to scrutiny as well. And effectively, the scrutiny committee is effectively, I think, a part of the audit process, because they're actually seeing how projects are going day to day, and then the audits actually come in and see what the big picture. And unfortunately, we seem to be losing 2 scrutiny committees, and the amount of stuff that's going through without much scrutiny now is getting alarming. I'm particularly always concerned about NABCEL taking on lots of properties to let out at a time when the housing market may collapse. So that's a big risk area, and I hope it's an area that the going concern and the audits will actually have a really good look at. Because obviously, if you bought £1 million worth of property and get a 4% or 6% return on those, if the market changes, they become less easy to rent. The population can change, but also the capital value of them can decrease, particularly quite sharply. So that's one area. And also the money we're pumping into things like the Abbey Street regeneration, where there's all sorts of questions, and we find out that the project's been declared as non-viable, apart from the little bit on the car park, and yet we've pumped in an unknown amount of money on it. And there's a lack of transparency there, because we're working with partners and we're paying the partners some money, and it's not on the contract list. It's all very vague, and so it's all these things around the edge that I think we need to actually have a good look at. The day-to-day running of the council is well managed. I mean, I've always thought very highly of Craig in terms of all the management of the accounts and that sort of stuff. It's the judgments on some of these sort of edge of council function projects. Thank you.
Any other member want to add anything?
I've got a couple of questions, please, if that's okay. It's to do with the fraud risk assessment. On page 5, it mentions security arrangements in the mayor's parlour. I wasn't sure what that means. And also on page 6, about managing risks. There's a £25 limit for cash, so that's easy to understand, but it's the contracts it mentions as well. Wonder if someone could explain what that
means. Do you want to
means?
answer that before I ask?
Maybe I'll address the comments directly from the from Councillor first of all. In terms of NABCEL, I think that we're slightly arm's length with that because NABCEL itself will have its own auditors looking at its own set of accounts. So, not to say that we would ignore it, but we would look to them valuing the assets at the company at that point in time because they'll be subject to a Companies Act audit. Having said that, in terms of the transactions between the council and that company, we make sure that they are compliant with statutory guidelines, and if you give it loans and have a council capital and things like that. So we'll just make sure that those transactions. And I suppose yes, we will look at it in the round in the sense of what's the value of your investment in NABCEL and the trading conditions of that company itself. But it will be primarily for the auditors of that company to form a view on its going concern. But I do recognise that that's part of the risks of and that board in terms of managing that company have that responsibility to manage that organisation. I'll be honest and say we'll have to. I'll note the information on Abbey Street as part of our audit, and I don't know the detail of that, so I can't comment on that directly at this point in time. But I'll note it as information received as part of our audit, and we'll consider that as in the round as we're going forward. I'm trying to find the reference to the Mayor's Parlour. So
I can pick that up if you want. I think this particular one, this is where, as the Audit and Standards Committee, they can request specific things to be brought as a report to this committee, and that's an example of a couple of them as to where we have done reports in the past to this committee when it was audit in the past, just audit. So it's just to say, look, as concerns are raised by this committee, if you wanted to request specific reports to be brought forward for consideration where we go into more detail, whether it's things that have been identified via Linda's internal audit reports, things like that, that's where it's just saying we can provide more information at request. The other point you raised was about the petty cash and the £25, which you said you were comfortable with, because that's obviously we want to limit the amount of cash that's been made available for petty cash. But the contracts, we use a computer system called Intend, and it's a contracts database. So every single contract that we've got is being put onto this database, so we can actually keep a full register of everything that we've got, who we've got contracts with, who the contract manager is, when it started, when it finishes, what its value is. So we can actually be proactive and actually, when it's coming up to the end of that particular contract, we can actually start the process in advance to go out to tender. So we're not chasing our tail at the end of the day. So it's management of being proactive.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Craig.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right.
I think, well, if you can recall that you're, I think as I said at the beginning of it, if you're to note and to confirm that it's consistent with your knowledge and understanding.
Right.
That's what we're asking you, really. So.
Everybody happy with that?
Yeah.
Anybody against? No? Thank you. Next item.
It's item 7, Chair. It's the partnership framework.
Yeah.
Linda is presenting.
In the annual governance statement that was published with our accounts last year, there was an action that required us to review the council's partnership framework because the last time it was reviewed was back in 2009. A review has taken place, and on the whole it's still seen as being fit for purpose and very few changes are necessary. The main changes are within section 8, which is on page 42, around information sharing and data management. because of the changes in the data protection legislation that are due in May of this year. So other than that, I don't think there's any more to say on that one.
Any comments from any member? Any officer want to comment? No? So we know.
I think Chair,
This
probably
one's
just a
for-
comment from us in terms of, I mean, depending on what the partnership arrangement was, you may end up having a disclosure in the financial statements if it's a sort of formal Section 75 agreement and materiality, so that will flow through from that. So they may well be subject to audit, but it doesn't, our audit wouldn't cover every partnership that the council has.
Well, the recommendation is that the Appendix A be approved. Agree?
Yeah.
Move on to internal audit plan. That's 8, I think. Do you want to speak on that?
Well, if Linda presents first, Chair,
Okay. Yeah, this is our proposed internal audit plan for 2018-19. The public sector internal audit standards require an annual audit plan that needs to be developed using a risk-based assessment. We introduced a risk-based approach some 20 years ago, so we agreed 12 months ago that during this current financial year we would review that, and that's what we've done. So what we've done, we've identified the audit universe, as you call it, which is every system or area that could possibly be subjected to internal audit work. And then we've looked at various factors, as I've put in paragraph 4.1 there, the extent of change and development, any staffing issues that we're aware of, high vacancy levels, complexity of the system, previous audit reports, the length of time it's been since we did the last audit, any frauds that we're aware of that have been detected or investigated. So we've used all of that information, and using our judgment, we have come up with a risk score, which is then being allocated to each of the systems that we've identified. Anything that scores 100 or below, we see that as being very, very low risk and doesn't actually warrant any internal audit work at this point in time, although we do keep them under review and we do go back to the scores and make sure that they're still very low. Areas such as that would be things like allotments. We've got allotments, we've got an allotment strategy, but the risk to the council is very low. Also graphic design, our internal graphic design system. So those sort of areas that would fall within that. Anything that scores 101 to 200 classed as medium risk, and we'll review those every 3 to 5 years. And then anything 201 or more is high risk, and we'll review those every 2 years. So we've gone through that process, and we've come up with operational audits that are seen to be the higher priority ones, and it's been a while since we've audited them. So in Appendix A, we've come up with a list of operational audits that have gone through that process. We also then have some annual reviews, such as asbestos management, data quality procurement. We do some work on water bodies as well. And so they come up every year. For our financial audits, we have a 3-year rolling programme. So we'll audit each of the financial areas at least once every 3 years. And then follow-up reviews at the bottom there. They're completed 6 to 12 months after we issue a final audit report. It depends on the number of issues and the priority of those issues and concerns that we've raised as to what the frequency would be. But the list of follow-up reviews there, they're the audits that have been completed over the last 12 months. And that's all I'd like to say. If you've got any questions.
Any questions? All right. Okay.
It's a very impressive list of things you're going to audit this year. You're going to be very busy, and quite a few of them are things that I think do need a good look at, particularly like the climbing wall. And some of these things on the review list I think could have actually benefited from going to a scrutiny committee every now and then to actually have a bit of a look at them more from a member's point of view. And the two processes seem to be sort of totally disconnected, that what opposition councillors are allowed to review and what the audit system goes. But I think it's quite useful to sort of tie in what hasn't been looked at. I mean, the climbing wall's never been looked at by scrutiny. I think it's never been looked at by audit, so it's well overdue. On a couple of key points, the independent living service, I went round to the local, what was sheltered housing yesterday, and their emergency pull cords haven't worked last weekend or the weekend before, and these systems are getting quite old and archaic now. So is part of the audit process actually going to look at the operational side as well as the financial side of these things? Because I think there is areas where, particularly because it's been a year since we've lost our wardens, they do need a good going over to see what issues have arisen. And in partnerships, as I mentioned earlier, there's like the Abbey Street project, which is a partnership allegedly with a firm that seems to have half gone under, and it's very murky. So I think that definitely needs to be looked at, the Abbey Street project, under the partnerships heading. Thank you.
Anybody else? I recommend,
Sorry, it's just a quick question, Chair. What are the water bodies?
It's the waters that are owned by the council, so we have to make sure that we've got the right signage up to warn the members of the public to stay away, and because we have had problems in the past. I think there was a young boy that drowned in one of the
We've had issues in
one of our Ensis pool.
Woodland Park. So.
Yeah, so it's just to make sure that proper checks are being made on a regular basis and the signage is there as it should be.
Thank you.
right, the recommendation is that the internal audit plan of Appendix A be approved. All in favour?
Yeah.
Any against? Thank you. Next item, Treasury Management Monitoring.
Thank you very much, Chair. Right, I'll try and keep this as brief as possible. Just a few points I do want to bring out from the report. The economic summary in section 3, just to highlight, inflation does remain high, but the MPC remain confident that it will fall back to 2% in the medium term, and there was no surprises with the rate increase. It didn't catch anybody by surprise at all. It was expected, and the economic outlook in section 4 does suggest that we will start to see increases sooner than we previously anticipated, as the markets are better, the economic situation is improving, but risks remain very finely balanced with the uncertainty still with Brexit. So we will be keeping a close eye on what's happening with rates, and that will impact on investment decisions we make as to how long we do put investments out for. The summary portfolio over the page on 5.4, balances do remain high at just shy of 40 million at the end of December, but we are expecting those to drop down to about 30 million by the end of March. And that's because our cash flows are expecting it. We don't receive council tax income or business rates income to the same degree in the last 2 months of the financial year as people get their considered 3 months for council tax. So that's why our balances then dwindle down. The actual portfolio split is shown at 5.5, and it does show that we've actually got quite a wide split across a number of institutions and across a number of different time frames. 5.7, which refers to the appendix on page 62, the only thing I do want to point out on there is if you did flip over to that chart, you will see that the liquid portfolio has dropped from 25% back in December 16 to 9%. So we're keeping a lot less cash instant accessible. But that is a concerted decision to do so we can actually lengthen the maturity profile of our investments, take advantage of interest rates that are available by taking out 6 months deposits or 3 month deposits. And the markets are far more stable now, so we've got more confidence in actually investing in these banks or building societies rather than just in the money market funds where they pay a very, very low rate of return. So we've made a decision to actually reduce that. But we do manage cash flows very very tightly, so we make sure we've always got cash available to fund our day-to-day spend, whether it's salaries, creditor payments, housing benefit payments, and we've never been in a position where we've needed to go and borrow because we've run out of cash. The average balances and return on 5.17 show that, yes, year on year comparing, investment returns are only 0.61% compared to 0.68 for last year, but that's the way the markets have been. But it's still way ahead of the benchmark of 3-month LIBOR or the average bank rate, which is 0.3 for the financial year. The property fund, which is one I do put quite a bit of detail in, although we've only got 1 million invested in it, it is giving us a healthy return. The good news is, since we saw that big blip when the referendum result came out and the value of the fund took a bit of a nosedive back in June, July, that has improved quite dramatically. The capital value has now increased substantially to about 980,000, compared to the million that we've got invested. So the table on 5.22 shows how that capital value has increased, but also shows the returns that we're getting on a quarterly basis and on a financial year basis. So we're getting over 4% on that £1 million investment. So we're happy for that to be there. We will also make consideration during the next financial year whether it's worth putting a bit more in it. So we're quite comfortable with that position at the moment. The rest of the report just breaks down the detail of what our activity has been over the last quarter. And 5.32 is our expected revenue outturn position. And the only point is the minimum revenue provision, because we did a review as a RMRP as to what we should be charging, and we think we can generate some savings against budget for that. We're not predicting any variances for our investment income or our debt interest, because everything seems to be tracking where we expected our returns to be. And the good news is the Prudential and Treasury indicators, everything is in line with our expectations, and there's no areas of concern that we need to report. But if anybody has got any specific questions they want to throw, then I'm happy to take them.
Remember? Caroline?
Yeah, it's just concerned with Brexit really. I know you said you were looking at interest rates and how Brexit will affect them, but is there anything else that we need to be concerned about?
Brexit is the biggest uncertainty at the moment. Inflation, although inflation's been high, MPC are trying to manage that by increasing interest rates to bring inflation back down. As more and more information comes out about Brexit, we'll see how the markets react. We'll also see what's happening with information we get from brokers in London, our Treasury advisors. We get a daily and a weekly update from them, what's happening with the markets. We receive information on a daily basis from a number of financial institutions, so we can actually see on every single day how the markets are reacting to any news. And that's why whenever we are looking to make any investment decisions, if it's more of a strategic decision, so anything outside of the 6-month arena, where we want to place funds for either a year or potentially longer, that's where we will take a more detailed view as to what is the market saying to us at the moment and what are the risks. The last thing we want to do is put something out for 1, 2, 3 years where we were aware of risks and we just chose to ignore them. So every decision is made with full consideration of what we are aware of at that point in time.
Thank you.
Councillor Gizlane?
Thank you. You've answered part of the question anyway, but this property fund, the CCLA,
Yeah.
I was going to ask are we capped at what we can put in if we do decide to invest more? And then, with Brexit again, is the option to, obviously if the interest rates drop, or a lot of our rates going down anyway, is there, I don't know, what would trigger us taking our money out? Does it get to a certain point, or do we just keep it in and just hope it goes back up again?
That's it. It is a Treasury investment decision, and what we've got to do is look at what's the longer term view. The property fund is a long-term investment. The return we're getting off it at the moment is effectively the yield from the rental income that the property fund are getting on their properties that they've acquired. The change in capital value is, as it is, the change in capital value at a point in time. How much are those assets worth? Now, at the moment, the value is less than what we've actually got invested. But we've taken the view in the Treasury team that this is a minimum 5-year investment period that we'll be looking to. We've had it in for 18 months now, something like that, so we are looking for the longer term horizon. If we were to take the decision that we wanted to withdraw those funds, there may be a delay in us getting that, because what the property fund manager has got to do is find somebody to buy that off us, or they've got to look to sell an asset and crystallise that cash. We'd also be subject to potentially a capital loss, which would hit our revenue balances. And coming up next year, there are some changes in accounting regulations which will affect how the accounting treatment of this property fund does affect our accounts, and that's something we're keeping a close eye on as well. But we're not taking a view that we will withdraw from that fund. It is a long-term decision. And as with house prices, capital values go up and down. They do follow a trend.
Thank you.
And the only maybe observation I make on yours is just to yes, reiterate that. I mean, in terms of your treasury management policy, in terms of, I suppose, I say it's all my clients, you're not a bank, but what you do is you look at it and go, well, what's the security of the money, because that's council taxpayers first of all, and then you look at proper financial management, return, and then liquidity. I suppose it's a free that the DCLG or MHCLG would expect you to look at. £1 million is a fairly low portion of your total investment, so it's not like you've got all your eggs in one basket. As Craig was saying, I think I might get this wrong. As I relatively new to council, the primary reason for investing it wasn't necessarily capital appreciation; it was the rental income, and and that's you need to balance that out in terms of making any investment decision. Whether you put more money in or not, property market, which way is it going to go? It depends what property you're in and Brexit uncertainties. So I think you just need to look at it in the round. But yes, the risk to property funds is their illiquidity. So you won't. It's not so you won't ever have access to it, but you'll have. It might take you some time. So it's not something you invest if you need to get your money out in a week. You might get it out in a month, or you might get it out within 6 months. It just depends on, as Craig was saying, that in that sense. So it's part of a mixed portfolio. So you just need, as your auditors, we would look at it in terms of making sure you comply with all the capital financing regulations, statutory regulations, we'll have an eye on it in terms of overall risk profile. As I say, the £1 million is relatively low risk. So
I didn't answer one of your questions, I've just remembered. You did ask about the limits that we could actually place in it. Per the strategy that council approved, we've got a limit, I think it's of £3 million per property fund if we were to choose to do it. But yeah, that's the limit. So what we do want to make sure is we're not, as Grant said, putting all our eggs in one basket, and it's a case of looking at our longer term cash flow to make sure that I don't need that cash in the medium term, which is the modelling that we will do before we will make any of these long-term investment decisions.
thank you.
Anybody else? Is it agreed then that we note the report? All agreed?
Agreed.
Good. Now move to item 10.
Thank you, Chair. This is a very simple issue. The Committee on Standards in Public Life have undertaken a review of issues arising from the last parliamentary election, and noted with some concern some of the issues that I think some members may have experienced themselves. I'm not aware of any particular issues locally, but there may well be issues of intimidation. Insofar as the report is concerned, the executive summary, I've given you the web link to the full report. If you're looking at it online, you could click on that and that takes you to the full report. You have got as an appendix the executive summary. Specifically for this report, the issue is on page 22 of the report itself, which identifies that the local authority management officer should ensure that members required to declare peculiar interests are aware of the sensitive interests provision in the Localism Act 2011. And you'll note the paragraph 5.1, I've extracted the relevant parts of the Localism Act there, which sets out what might amount to a sensitive interest And I think the purpose behind the request from the committee on standards in public life is to ensure that existing members are aware of this. Now, the issue, I think, is it should be made available to candidates and agents in the upcoming elections as well, that this is something that they can take advantage of once they are elected, if they feel that they do have a particular interest that might make them susceptible to intimidation. I should say that this section was originally in the original Code of Conduct and was actually, it came about because of issues to do with Cambridge Life Sciences, if you remember the case, and a particular elected member who was a scientist was being targeted by certain groups as a result of their activities working for Cambridge Life Sciences. I think it might have been to do with GM crops at the time. And so the legislation was amended at the time, the Code of Conduct was amended. This has found its way into the Localism Act, so the provision is there. Quite how it will apply to our members, I think, will be interesting to see. If any member wishes to put forward the case, I'd be interested to hear it. As you'll see, it does require both the member and I to agree that it is in fact a sensitive interest that could lead to intimidation. That may well be the case, so we'll wait and see. What we've been asked to do with immediate effect is to notify existing members, Chair, but as I say, I would want to make it clear to any prospective members as well that there is this in case they are undertaking a particular employment that might cause them to be the subject of some form of harassment, etc. The recommendation is as stated at 2.1, Chair, and other than that, I don't wish to say anything, but I believe Councillor Kandaka would like to speak.
I won't leave the chair this time. Yeah, I stood in the last two parliamentary elections, and it's interesting how bitter and much hatred is stirred up. And I think it was really brought home by the death of the MP last time, Joe Cox. And so I do think we all need to be mindful of how much goes on in elections and try and diffuse a lot of the hate, because I mean there's a lot of enemies of the people type stuff spread around, and I do think we need to try and sort of get in the mind that we should disagree with Marcus or whoever the Labour candidate is, respectfully say that their interests don't match what we think they should be, but we should be very careful about what we spread in terms of stirring up hate, and particularly also when other people are spreading hate around. Yeah, there's so much fake news, and it was featured on Channel 4 News last night about the Cambridge Analytics stuff, where people are actually analysing all the Facebook posts, harvesting and actually doing fake polls. So effectively, you might be given a poll saying, check your personality, asking you a whole load of questions, and then reflecting information back to you to make you hate a particular figure. And it happened a lot in the American elections with Trump and things, where people, if their concerns were about X, Y or Z, fishing or gun control or whatever, by analysing people, these analytic firms were actually spreading back and reinforcing hatred. So we do need to be robust, we do need to disagree, but I do think it is getting worse and worse, the situation, and the hatred that's getting stirred up by a lot of these campaigns on left and right and all over. And it does lead to intimidation, and in the worst case, it's led to an MP being murdered. So I think it's difficult because we do disagree, and there are things where people are being deceitful and dishonest and all that lot, but we need to do it in a way where we are more polite. And it's difficult, I know, because we're already getting chuckles, but I do want a more honest politics where we actually talk about issues, how we fund school meals, how we do employment or whatever, rather than all this, he's a commie supporter, he's got a red hat, he's work. Yeah, we do need to improve the standards of politics, and I think a lot of the councillors now are on Facebook, and it is really good to actually tone things down, but also have an honest debate. And it'd be great to have more hustings events and get away from the social media and actually have more like the old style politics in some ways, because unfortunately we seem to be going down a bit of a sewer at the moment, and it's not getting much better. Thank you.
Just to say, Keith, that I stood in 1983 for Parliament here, and I've just been sorting things out. The cuttings, the paper cuttings, show just exactly the same as what's happening today. That was before we had the computer and Facebook and whatever. So there's no difference. It's always been the same.
I think the difference is it's getting to vulnerable people who get bombarded with messages, and those people, some of them are the sort of characteristic where they will think a person is trying to destroy the country, and then they'll do something really stupid, and
Yeah.
it is getting worse.
Can we move to the recommendation? Is the right to all elected members to alert them? Is that agreed?
Yes. Each round candidates and agents.
Yeah, typing. Yeah. Thank you. Next item is item 11.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is a little bit more involved in that the Committee on Standards in Public Life are in fact consulting on the current arrangements for maintaining standards in local authorities. I guess it goes back to concerns that were expressed by the committee back in 2010-2011, when there was a discussion around what they saw as a watering down of standards, and obviously part of that was the bonfire of the Quangos, and the Standards Board for England was axed, etc. The National Code of Conduct was withdrawn, and local authorities were told to just get on with it, if you like. And in doing that, obviously a raft of legislation went with it, some of which was in connection with things like sanctions, as you'll hear in due course. So they are consulting. They have had concerns. I know going forward that the reforms that were implemented in the Localism Act may have gone too far the other way, and I think what they're looking for now is to understand precisely where we are, and perhaps try and recalibrate it to where they think it should be, which may not be back to what we had before, but maybe somewhere in between where we are now and where we were. In that respect, they've, at Appendix A, you've got the consultation paper, and you'll see they start on the top of page 82. They've started some consultation questions, which set out issues around the structures, processes. They want to know about sanctions. They want to know about the code of conduct. And the investigation process. They've asked about whistleblowing, curiously, which is unusual, because whistleblowing really formed part of the old regime. Particularly, it was always dealt with separately through confidential reporting code anyway, so I'm not entirely sure why that is. And they've tagged in intimidation of councillors, which ties in with the previous work that they had done, and you've just been considering part of it. You've had the executive summary from that paper. As Appendix B, and this is by no means the finished article, is a set of suggested responses to the questions. They were written by me in a little bit of haste. They were going to be written by another officer, but unfortunately they were all sick, so I stepped in to put something together. And therefore, what you have is, if you like, a draft, and we do have time, because we don't have to get this back until I think it's the 8th of May. So the 18th of May. So what I was going to suggest, if members would like to take their time to review the response and share their comments with me. The proposal I'm putting forward in the recommendation is that this be settled, the final version be settled with the chair of the committee, which may be Councillor Tandy, or if it's after the 3rd of May, then whoever is appointed at annual council on the 16th of May, so they'll still have time to get it in. The proposal is simply that members have a look at the issues that are being highlighted. The one that I've particularly stressed, I think, is the fact that the committee is, I've said a toothless animal. I mean, it really is in terms of sanctions. If you bear in mind that under the old regime, the committee had the power to suspend a member and also withdraw financial support, so they could actually withhold the members' allowances during the period of suspension. That was seen as something that was always done as a last resort, but in some cases it was done. And of course you had then the ability for matters to go to a tribunal for disqualification in certain cases. Now, that may well be where you set your the gauge in terms of how far you want to go, that you may not want to be able to reinvent the wheel in terms of taking it to a tribunal, but you might want the ability to have a significant sanction to ensure compliance. Because clearly, if a member then turns around and says, I'm not doing it, that's it. Councillor Kandahar has indicated speech.
Yeah, I know. I'm just looking. Does any member want to come in at this stage? Yep, Councillor Kidham.
Thank you. I was just going to say, if we are to make our own replies, if they're all correspondent, is there any chance we could have this in like an email format, or if that's allowed?
I mean, in terms of the responses, if you want to respond to me, what I'll do is I'll put all the responses together and sit down with the chair, and we'll go through them, and then we'll prepare a final version which we'll send out to all members to see what we're proposing, and then unless there's any violent objection to it, then we'd send it off. It is electronic. It's a PDF, though, I presume. So we can circulate a Word version if you want to add your comments to it and send them back. But if you do it on that basis, can you identify it in a different colour or something, a different font or track changes or something, so that we can spot the changes?
If you use Google documents, because we've all got Gmail, you can put like notepads on it, can't you?
Yeah.
I'm not up to things.
Yeah.
We'll make a note of the training check.
Yeah.
So the
satisfying, isn't it?
We all want.
Can we hear Keith first of all?
Yeah.
Right, thank you. This is a very interesting development, because obviously I'm the person who's had the most complaints against him, and in fact the only person who ever goes to a standards committee here. I've been to standards committee for sending an email when a developer wanted to chop a tree down. I sent an email, and the result of that email is I'm censured. I have campaigned because air quality is a big issue. My wife put a press release out. I get sanctioned. There is a serious problem here in that all this event does not result in a proper hearing. What happens is we have a kangaroo trial where whether what I say is...
I object to you using that word, kangaroo trial. There's been no kangaroo trials in this council.
Right, I'll carry on. There has been a...
trials, we're not a court.
It's not a court of law. That's a key point. And so I have not had a hearing where whether what I say is true matters. What matters is, do I bring the council into disrepute? What I do is I stand up for my residents, and to call it sub-criminal to try and save trees, to point out that this council is asking consultants to modify consultants reporting to the air quality. The council did ask air quality consultants to modify a report. What we said was factually true. The fact that the council doesn't want us to say it That is an unreasonable way to punish me. We should have champions in this council, people who are respectful, and officers should be officers and members should be members. And if we start having a system where members can lose their allowances and get called sub-criminal, where do we go? Pickles was right in saying the decision on members' conduct should rest with the electorate. When I re-stood for election, I got the highest vote of any re-standing councillor here. I get twice the vote of Labour councillors because I work very hard. And to penalise me for being a champion, for trying to stop the council chop trees down, for trying to stop the council making residents in my borough, my ward, redundant, is obscene. And the secret information I was supposed to have divulged in one of my complaints was about the redundancy of a member of staff. That redundancy was featured in the Coventry Telegraph, with our council's managing director giving her a leaving present. How can it be a secret if it's in the Coventry Telegraph? The fact I'm told about it in an email from an officer doesn't mean I can never find out the same piece of information from other sources. We have a rotten process here, and the public is sick and tired of me going before the standards hearing. It does not work. What we need to do is have a mediation system, so if I disagree with the council, we talk about it. If I do something wrong, in a meeting like the time I shouted because I wasn't allowed to ask a question, we sort it out. We do not go for a standards process that calls me a sub-criminal. We need to do better than this, and the council needs to do better. Thank you.
Just to say that when you tell lies in the council...
I have never told a lie in the council.
Oh, yes,
this
you
is
did.
the point. What I say is true.
You refuse to apologise.
That's not lying, is it?
Refusing to apologise isn't the same as lying.
You told lies about my wife.
What?
Yes, you did.
Oh, I can't believe I'm hearing this. Not lying.
Just to
you don't
respond,
know your
Chair,
wife.
if I can just reassure members, and as most members of this committee have at some stage have sat on a panel, they will know that due process does take place. There is a process in place to give Councillor Kandaka his opportunity to present his case and call his witnesses. And then it goes with an independent person present and a decision is reached. Now, I understand Councillor Kandaka might not like the decision, but that is the decision and that is the result of due process. So that's where we're at. I guess the question, and it's one that's actually specifically raised in here, is the issue in connection with confidentiality of those proceedings. That is obviously something that Councillor Kandaka can raise directly with the Committee on Standards in Public Life if he feels that the approach that we take by maintaining them as exempt items is wrong, because they could recommend changes to legislation so they'd be dealt with in public. As you know, when we deal with these things, we deal with them on their merits at each case, and we do take the view, or I certainly advocate the view, that we do that primarily to protect complainants from unwarranted public disclosure. We wouldn't want to discourage people from bringing a complaint for fear that they're going to be pilloried on social media or something of that ilk. So, but those are matters that are actually up for discussion in this paper. So, by all means, if Councillor Kandaka is unhappy with the way things are, just as we're making recommendations as a committee, he can similarly respond to this directly in his own personal capacity. As I say, Chair, the recommendation is at 2.1, and it's to finalise the response in consultation with the Chair. Obviously, we have until the 18th of May, but if members do want to pass their comments through to me, if they have any, as quickly as they can, I'll be very grateful, and then I can sit down with the Chair and we can agree the precise wording and prepare a draft response.
Is that agreed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed. you. The next item is exclusion of the public and the press. There has to be a resolution. Could somebody formally move the resolution?
Move.
Moved, is that seconded? Thank you very much.
We'll just turn the table.